वो लोग हाथ खड़ा करें जिनके कंपनियों में सेफ्टी के उपकरण मिलते ही नहीं है। नहीं मिलते हैं? देखिए आप और क्या मिलते हैं? ठीक है। तो ये जो सेफ्टी उपकरण मिलते हैं उनकी क्वालिटी कैसी होती है, उनकी हालत कैसी होती है?
जब काम चलाओ दस्ताने मिलते हैं। और जूते तो खैर कंपनी देती ही है।
अच्छा ठीक है।
बाकी
काम चलाओ मतलब क्या होता है?
वो सर एक आधा घंटे में फट जाती है।
आधा घंटे फट जाती है?
फट जाती है वो।
फिर मांगते नहीं हैं?
मांगते हैं, बोलते भाई नहीं भाई रोज कैसे नहीं मिलेगा, एक बार ही मिलेगा सर।
बोल रहे हैं ना कि मेरा कंपनी में तो सेफ्टी भी है, जब भी नुकसान हो रहा है। हाँ, डाई बांधना है, कौन मशीन पर बांध देता है, कौन मशीन पर, इसी के मारे हो जाता है एक्सीडेंट। और पीस मांगता है प्रोडक्शन, घंटा में 1000 पीस 800 पीस मांगता है, इसमें भी हो जाता है एक्सीडेंट। डबल स्टॉक भी आ जाता है, बोल्ट भी टूट जाता है, वो चेकिंग कुछ भी नहीं करता है। डाई सेटर एक है और जो नई डाई बांधता है उसको भी डाई बंधवा देता है, डाई भी खुल जाता है। हाँ, और सेफ्टी भी तो उसमें लगा हुआ है, जूता भी देता है, ड्रेस भी दे रखा है। हाथ में दस्ताने देते हैं, 8 घंटा में एक देते हैं।
8 घंटे में एक?
हाँ, एक देते हैं जी।
लेकिन नए नए बंदा को लोग भर्ती कर लेते हैं, लेकिन उसको मतलब मशीन पर बैठा देते हैं। 2 लड़की नया नया भर्ती हुई है और उसको ब्लेड काटने के लिए बैठा दिए, और उसका हाथ कटने से अभी मतलब इधर 3-4 दिन हुआ तो हाथ कटने से बच गया। हमको बोले बैठने के लिए, तो मैं नहीं बैठी। मैं बोली मैं नहीं बैठूंगी। इसके लिए क्वालिटी सर गुस्सा भी हो गए, लेकिन मैं बोली मैं नहीं बैठूंगी। एक बार मैं ठोकर खा चुकी, मैं दोबारा नहीं बैठूंगी। लेकिन वो लड़की खुद बता रही थी कि मेरा हाथ कटने से बच गया। और प्रोटेक्शन का दबाव है सर जी। जी नहीं, लोहा लाइन है ना,
लोहा लाइन ही है
जी। कहाँ पत्तू मतलब पीस भी उठाने पर हाथ कट जाती है सर जी, लेकिन नहीं देते हैं। बोलते हैं कि मालिक मना किया है। मुझे दस्ताने अब नहीं देते हैं, गुस्सा से नहीं देते हैं।
बचपन मेरा जिला इटावा में गुजरा। मेरी शादी 16 साल में हुई थी। अब मेरे पति खाते पीते थे तो वो काम धंधे पे नहीं जाते थे, इसीलिए मैं गांव से भजी। मेरा सबसे पहले दोनों भाई यहाँ रहते थे, तो उनसे मैंने कहा भाई मुझे बुला लो, तो उनने कही ठीक है आ जाओ। 2011 से मैं मशीन चला रही हूँ। ये फिल्टर वगैरह बनते हैं, ये जैसे हवाई जहाज के हैं, बसें के हैं और मोटरसाइकिल के हैं, मारुति के हैं, ये फिल्टर बनते हैं। मेरे स्टूडेंट 3 हो चुके हैं। अभी मैं पावर प्रेस पे काम करती हूँ, पावर प्रेस पे मेरे स्टूडेंट हुए हैं। कोई मुझे भर्ती नहीं लेता है, अभी वही मशीन चला रही हूँ, मजबूरी है मेरे पास।
मम्मी को काम करने में कोई ऐसे काम होते हैं जैसे सुई में धागा डालना या कुछ भी हाथों से मतलब चावल वगैरह खाना तो नहीं खा पाती हैं, तो मुझे बहुत बुरा लगता है।
मम्मी का एक्सीडेंट हो गया था तो मैं पढ़ता था, 8वीं क्लास में था। फिर मैंने भी काम सीखना शुरू कर दिया, पढ़ाई मेरी बंद हो गई।
मैं मशीन में जो कुछ कमा रही हूँ, महीने में सैलरी आती, बच्चों के लिए कर रही हूँ सर। बच्चों के लिए तो सर बहुत कुछ सपने हैं। बेटी तो पढ़ रही है, बेटी गांव में पढ़ रही मम्मी के पास, 9th में, अब इस हाई स्कूल में जाएगी।
मैं आई थी, मैंने बोला मम्मी मुझे गुजिया बहुत पसंद है, तो मम्मी ने गुजिया बनाई। मैं अपनी मम्मी के लिए बेटी नहीं बेटा बन के साबित करना चाहती हूँ। पूरी दुनिया में मुझे मेरी मम्मी बेस्ट लगती है।
There are 2 crore workers, mostly migrant workers, in the auto sector in India. Too many of them lose their hands, their fingers in the ordinary course of work. What can we do to make their working conditions safer, better? Thank you all for joining us today at the launch of Crushed 2020. A second report by the Safe in India Foundation that examines worker injuries in the auto sector supply chain in Gurgaon. In a moment, Sandeep Sachdev, co-founder of the Safe in India Foundation, will take you through the key findings in the report. But first, a warm welcome to everyone that's logged on today to be a part of a very crucial conversation. So we'd like to thank you for prioritizing the issue of worker safety, and an especially warm welcome to our expert panel. Our approach during this discussion is quite simply Join hands to save hands, because it's going to take collaboration for concrete solutions. A quick round of introductions. We have Rajesh Menon, Director General of SIAM, the Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers. That's the apex national body representing all major vehicle and vehicular engine manufacturers and brands in India. We have Vinny Mehta, Director General at ACMA, the Auto Component Manufacturers Association of India, the apex body representing the interests of the auto component industry with about 800 members. Rajiv Khandelwal, co-founder and executive director, Ajivika Bureau, an energetic collective of field workers and staff working to ensure that labor is valued, migration is safe, secure, and dignified. Dr. K.R. Shyamsundar, Professor of Human Resource Management at XLRI, one of India's best management schools. Professor Sundar has a deep understanding of India's labor practices and associated issues. Anil Sachdev, founder and chairman of the Soil Institute of Management, an inspirational man who advocates the right kind of leadership and the practice of mindfulness for ensuring zero accidents. And Sandeep Sachdev, co-founder and CEO, Safe in India Foundation. Thank you all very much for being a part of this conversation today, a very crucial conversation and actually topical as well, given recent events in Parliament with the passage of laws affecting the labor force in the country. Sandeep will now be presenting the highlights of Crush 2020, which is the most recent analysis of worker injuries in the auto supply chain. Sandeep.
Thank you very much, Manvi, and thank you to the panel members to be here today. And I can see more than 100 people have joined, and I'm sure more will join later. Before I share the presentation for about 10 minutes, can I just set a quick context? Safe in India Foundation, as many of you know because your support, was started by the batch of 1991 of IIM Ahmedabad. Those guys have supported us from the very beginning, and now we have support from alumni of IIM Ahmedabad 92, IT Roorkee batch 88, 87, and several others, more than 200 people. It's with their support that we are here today. This analysis today is of more than 1,800 workers who have been injured while making auto components. This analysis is also a piece which shows that over 3 years, there's a consistent trend of variety of factors that we are pretty sure now can be seen as a way to get to the solution, because we have some specific understandings of why these things are happening and what can be done. The second important thing I want to state early on is clearly all of us have a role to play, but at Safe in India, we believe that the most influential and powerful set of people who can make a change here are the people on the panel today and the auto sector brands who actually buy components from all these people. We believe that businesses today are as, if not more powerful than governments in making this kind of change, and therefore our constant request that auto brands take the lead in this. So I'll switch over to the presentation now. Give me a second to share screen. So last year we launched a report called Crush 2019. This is a sequel of that, as I said. People here on listening to us, please note the social media handles on the right bottom. And during this panel discussion, if you wish to add any comments there, please do. Use the hashtag join hands to save hands. And on the chat, please put any questions if you wish. Right. What are the objectives of Safe in India? 3, we help injured workers with their ESIC healthcare and compensation. We have helped more than 2,500 workers now. We have got them compensation about 18 crores of rupees pre-COVID, and that work has started again. Since the factories have started, we have started seeing a number of accidents every day already. We use that knowledge given to us by workers to try influencing the auto sector to improve safety in the supply chain. Clearly, this initiative started with the last report in August 19, so the change will come the next year. So a lot of today is about financial year 19-20 stopping in March 20 pre-COVID. We also try changing ESIC practices so that they can service their workers, which are 14 crore people in the country depend upon ESIC for healthcare and compensations. they can do it better. Two key values of Safe in India at the bottom I want to highlight. We try being solution-centric, and we are independent of any political party or union affiliations. The highlights of 2020 and the details are in the report. The report will be on our website in about 15 minutes time. First, the injuries and post-accident treatment got worse in Gurgaon, Faridabad in financial year 1920. Second, the three largest regional OEMs, as expected, Maruti, Hero and Honda, their supply chains do contribute to 95% of these injuries. But this is a problem of entire auto sector. It's only because we are in Gurgaon, we see a lot more of them. More on that in a bit. Third, power press, which is the single biggest reason for these accidents, actually the percentage increased to about 55% and the reasons got worse. Fourth, the regulations are inadequate. They are enforced poorly. I think sadly it will not come as a surprise to any one of us. And the accidents are underreported. We'll talk about OSH code in a bit with the panel where we have experts on that subject. Finally, we have been working with the auto brands, mainly Maruti, Hero, Honda, Eicher, Bajaj, Mahindra, last three in a smaller way, first three in the big way. We have made some progress with them. We'll talk about that. Similarly with central and state government, again, a start made, a long way to go. Haryana contributes 50% of auto sector production according to KPMG. It's a bit dated, but it gives you a sense that our data is representative of the sector and similar issues exist in the other auto sector zones in the country. Right. On the left, you see that 86% of the workers who came to us, so practically all right, were from auto sector. Clearly, there are crush injuries, and we focus on crush injuries, which means cut hands and fingers, right? But auto sector, because of metal forming, has a lot of that. On the right, you see that majority of these workers are migrants, almost 80% plus actually. On contract, more than 60-65%, and young, 50% plus are below 30 years of age. This is the kind of demographic that you saw during COVID on the roads walking home. And we did a lot of research on that. You can find that on our website. Practically nobody amongst these workers, 1,800 workers we're talking about, was part of any union. The reporting done by the government, unfortunately, is very small. Haryana state has been reporting 40 odd injuries, in a year. We see 500 plus, just us, right? Also, the trend line on the right, you see the factory inspections were coming down even until 2017 in the previous 6 years. Before that, right? Unfortunately, after 17, the government has not published data and we're talking to them about it, but it's an issue. Now, specifically on OEMs, and we don't want to blame anybody, it's a data out there which has been there for the longest time. It is to highlight the issue, and we are pleased that they are noticing this issue now, right? So clearly Maruti Suzuki is the largest because we understand they are the largest in the region. They increased marginally during these 3 years. Hero increased the most. Honda reduced, but we will see how time shows whether it's actually reduced because we haven't seen much action from there. In fact, on the right, you see that 19% of the accidents happen in other brands too, Ashok Leyland, Eicher, Escorts, JCB, Mahindra, Tata, TVS, Yamaha, right? Most of the workers tend to mention the large names because they are big. They tend to mention less of these small names. We suspect it's more than 19%. And by the way, if anybody is wondering, the total is more than 100% because the supply chain is shared. The power press under Indian law is a dangerous machine. It should have all sorts of protections in the factory, right? But what's happening instead are these breaches. Untrained, unskilled helpers doing the job of skilled operators, or machines being allowed to operate without sensors or safety guards, machines being sold with safety features that should be mandatory as optional. All these are non-compliant with Factory Act, and there should have been fines around them. But when we look at fines, what you see on the right-hand side, 3,000 rupees. That's the average fine over thousands of these violations that you see on the left. 71% of cases end up in convictions. It's a very high conviction rate. Therefore, it's pretty clear that this is a serious breach. Again, the data stopped in 2017. Now, specifically, what we find, like last year, is there is concentration, right? There are few factories which are habitual offenders. So for example, right now we notice that 1/3 of accidents occur in only 31 factories. Clearly, if we could focus on 31 factories, we can make a big dent in this problem. And we are talking about this to the stakeholders. Let's see what can be done. We take worker data very seriously and confidentially, so we often do not share the names of these factories and workers, but it's data they can find from ESIC. We don't have to make it public. On the right, you see that 22% of the factories are ACMA members. ACMA is here represented today. We will talk about it. And clearly, ACMA are the most professional of the supply chain, so they can make a quick dent in this. Something interesting happened early last year, that India changed its national voluntary guidelines to national guidelines for responsible business conduct. What it does is it asks the businesses in India to be responsible for their supply chain, including safety. So we analyzed the business responsibility reports of these six brands. We found some good practice, we found some issues. We highlighted to all six of them. They responded, some did, some didn't. Picture is just to show you where we are with this. We'll be publishing a report on this. The important point to note is the government has announced guidelines which says OEMs, the brands, are accountable for safety in their supply chain. An interesting thing about Niti Aayog's guidelines and work on sustainable development goals is that whereas they have set some very good goals for a number of indicators, there is an indicator 8.8, which is specific about securing safe working spaces for workers. Unfortunately, the government has not set an indicator target for this one, and that's something we are highlighting. So as I said, we have a multi-stakeholder engagement going on, some initial positive steps, long way to go. We are thankful to Maruti Suzuki for engaging with us very well. We sit down with them regularly, we discuss ideas. They have made a start, long way to go. Unfortunately, Hero and Honda not as responsive. With Honda, we have made a small start now. Siam and ACMA, we just started engaging and we've got very positive engagement going on with them. So we are hoping a lot will be done, and they're both here today. Mahindra, Eicher and Maruti responded to our business responsibility reports. Others, we are waiting. On the government, we all understand the challenge there is. Central Government Labour Department has set up an internal committee under DG Fastly. DG Fastly is the central government's safety arm. So they are the right people. We are in dialogue with them constantly. And the internal committee set up what they're doing, what their recommendations are. We have a vague idea, but we need to find that specifically, and we are pushing for that. Similarly, finally, Haryana government last month set up a committee on accidents, on factory accidents specifically, under an IS officer, and we are talking to them as to the structure and shape that should take. We have signed an MOU with Ministry of MSME because clearly the supply chain has lots of middle and small industry, so we have to implement a few safety initiatives with them. OSH Labor Code, like many good people, we also were part of consultations. We went through a lot of detail. You have heard about what Manvi said. We'll talk about it later. To end, a few key recommendations. There are plenty more in the report, but we are really requesting the industry to create joint task force. I think if they get together, they can make a dent. There is a lot of good practice to share. There's a lot of economy of scale in that. On the right-hand side with the government, we have been requesting a joint task force with the industry. We have been asking for stricter enforcement of safety regulations, and our job is to give them data. So we do that and we push that constantly. We talked about Haryana State. Ministry of Skill Development has an important role to play in upskilling workers, specifically for safety. We have talked about MSM and Niti Aayog. Our role going forward, left bottom, is clearly to keep reporting accident data, highlighting the issues, but also highlight solutions. We will publish reports on compliance with national guidelines of responsible business conduct for the auto sector specifically, at least top 10 brands. We will publish a report on PowerPress and its issues and recommendations. We'll continue facilitating dialogue. We would try empowering more and more workers with knowledge on safety and ESIC. And we are here today, of course, to increase public awareness. So we will carry on with this. The research report is now available on our website. The website address is there. Before I finish and hand over to Manvi, I want to play a 20-second video for people who haven't seen what a power press looks like, which is a real thrust of one of our recommendations that power press is 50% of accidents. Plus, if we can take care of power press, we can reduce a lot of accidents. So very specific. I'm going to play that. Give me a second. I will request Veer to play a video of Neetu Devi. She was supposed to be with us today talking to the panel and to you. Unfortunately, she got held up at her work, so she couldn't join us. But Veer, if you can play that video, please.
सर मेरा नाम नीतू देवी है। जैसे मेरी उंगली कटी है पावर प्रेस में, तो बहुत से लोगों की जाने कितने लोगों की कटती हैं और जाने कितने लोगों को पता भी नहीं चलता है कट जाती हैं। तो मैं यही सोच कह रही हूँ, आप लोगों को प्रार्थना, कंपनी वालों के ऊपर कुछ दबाव करो जाए, सेफ्टी रखी जाए, क्यों कटती हैं उंगली। इसलिए मैं यही प्रार्थना हूँ, जैसे मेरी उंगली उनको मुआवजा भर हो जाए, उन लोगों को दिया जाए। और फिर उसके बाद ईसाई कंपनी में 2 दिन 3 दिन इलाज करा देते हैं, सर निकाल देते हैं उनको बंदों को। और सोई जाने कितने मेरे सामने हुआ मेरी कंपनी में। एक बंदा था, उसका मैंने जान पर से उसको तो निकाल ही दिया भाई। तो मैं ये सोच रही हूँ, ऐसा दबाव करो जो कंपनी वाले इलाज भी नहीं कराते ढंग से, उसको निकाल भी देते, ना ईसाई बनवाते। दबाव करो तो वे कहते हैं जाओ, ऐसा करोगे तो नहीं इलाज कराएंगे। ऐसे ये इसलिए से दबाव से बंदे जाते डरा, तो वे बेचारे कुछ कर नहीं पा रहे।
So we have another worker who actually could come to our office today. आप बताइए। नमस्कार।
नमस्कार सर। आने
के लिए आज शुक्रिया। आप बताइए सबको, आप क्या बताना चाहते थे?
सर हमको, हमारा नाम मोहन पासवान है। हमको सर 2 बार पाँव प्रेस में चोट लग चुकी है हाथ में, समझिए। हमारे बंदे के और लगी, हमारे कंपनी में 5 बंदे को, समझिए। उसके बाद में कंपनी रखती नहीं है, काम पर निकाल देती है, दूसरा कंपनी रखेगा नहीं सर। IMT मने सर में सर बहुत ऐसा सौकड़े के सवारी है कि हर बंदे को चोट लग जा रही है, आगे चल के बंदे को निकाल दिया जा रहा है कंपनी से। उसके बाद में 2-4 महीना रखने के बाद में बोलता है कि तुम जाओ, भागो, फिर काम तुमको कहीं ढूंढो, दूसरा कंपनी रखती नहीं सर। यही हम चाहते हैं कि और भाई को किसी को चोट ना लगे आगे चल के। हम लोग यही चाहते हैं सर कि हमारा तो हो गया घटना, हमारे साथ 2 बार हो गई सर ऐसा घटना, आगे चलकर और भाई किसी को नहीं हो जाए हमारे साथ में घटना। हाँ, भाई को आगे चल के आप लोग कृपा बनाए कि कोई आगे चल किसी बंदा को चोट ना लगे, हम यही चाहते हैं सर।
शुक्रिया मोहन जी, आपने एकदम ठीक बोला। शुक्रिया। So Manvi, now hand it over to you.
Well, I think it was absolutely wonderfully sensitive to hear from Mohan Paswan. His plea that, I have been injured, and my plea to manufacturers is that let's put into place practices that prevent such injuries from happening to other workers. Mr. Menon, I'm going to come straight to you. It's reassuring to all of the stakeholders of the Safe in India initiative, especially the workers that we just heard from, that you are here, that you are part of the Safe in India process. Take a moment to explain to us why you wanted to be a part of this process.
Thank you, Manvi, and thank you, Sandeep. I just want to mention that prevention is a very important attribute, and as high safety and health standard at work is as important as any business parameter and a business performance parameter. So from that perspective, I think we found it very important, and I think it's useful for us to partner with Safe India Foundation from 3 or 4 perspectives. One is to, of course, engage with Safe India Foundation on data based on their experiences with some of the OEMs they have worked with. But of course, through us, we can try and get a bigger one, wider outreach to many more OEMs and get a feedback and engage them on data, which Sandeep kept referring to in his presentation. Second is regulations. There was some reference to regulations also in the film and the presentation. So how we can engage on regulations and how we can ensure we sensitize our OEMs and probably even give feedback on any changes required in the regulations. Third, there was this mention on guidelines for responsible business conduct. This is something which we would like to work very closely with Safe India Foundation and see how we can work in partnership with OEMs and see how we can exchange best practices and what we can do vis-a-vis some improvement areas for OEMs individually. I think broadly, we would like to make a change. As Sandeep mentioned, we would like to make a quick dent, and we would be very happy to partner with Safe India Foundation for that.
I think you've touched upon a number of important issues, which is to stress the importance of safety, to commit to an outreach to OEMs, which is original equipment manufacturers, to look at how guidelines and regulations can be enforced more effectively. And then there is really turning the spotlight on responsible business conduct, which in many ways is a part of the DNA of large companies, and really put the spotlight on that. Vinny Mehta, I'm coming to you with broadly the same thought and the same question. The idea that industry really needs to work together on this, set safety standards, set the bar high itself, ensure that workers have safe working conditions. Now, I'm not, I know it's going to sound like I'm really belaboring the point, but you must have picked up on it in the report that Sandeep presented, that a fourth of the members covered in Crush 2020 work for companies that are ACMA members. This is the start of the process. The engagement with SIAM and ACMA has just begun. We are aware and conscious of that. But how do you hope to take this forward?
Yeah, thank you. You had forewarned me. Okay, so Manvi, thank you for having me, and Sandeep and the entire team of Safe India. Heartiest congratulations for this report. I have been engaged with Safe India for last, if I recall, 2015 onwards. Sandeep, is that right? That's when the first report was done. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the third edition, Sandeep? Or the fourth?
The second. This is a third big report, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think, we predominantly believe that if the industry has to be a world-class industry, the vision of the automotive industry is to be within the top 3 of the world. We already are almost in say car production, we are number 4. And had this pandemic not struck us, probably would have been number 3. I think it's a tad little difficult to digest that you would be a world-class industry, literally treating on the workers, right? So something has to be done, and we are committed to it. But one must also understand that the value chain of the automotive industry is very long and winding. While ACMA may represent 800 odd members, which are probably, if I may say, the tip of the iceberg, because it is just the tier 1s and a few tier 2s. But the number of players engaged in the industry could be anywhere between 30 to 50,000. We do not even have a count, because this industry in some sense represents the entrepreneurial spirit of India. But again, one cannot be world class, literally having workers lose their limbs. There is some amount of progress. I wouldn't say quite a bit of progress. It has been slow. The numbers sort of reflected, and we will come as to what needs to be done. But again, I am very committed, and I'm very happy that Rajesh and Siam are onboarded. And, it's literally the top of the value chain that sets the standards and pulls things up, right? So a lot needs to be done from the vehicle manufacturers. A lot is expected. We will speak about it. And ACMA stands committed, and we will work together on this.
It's good to hear that, Vinny. Again, we do know that the value chain for auto is a long and wide one. I'm paraphrasing some of the words that you used. ACMA has tier 1, tier 2. We have to sort of extend the net from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 and beyond. Get the entire supply chain to start thinking about worker safety. But, I'm going to turn to Rajiv Khandelwal. This point that comes through so clearly, Rajiv, in Crush 2020, of all the injured workers, 88% are migrants, 65% are contractual, and almost all are non-unionized. Your organization, Mr. Khandelwal, Ajivika Bureau, it's been working with migrant workers for more than 10 years in their home states, in their destination states. And I want you to reflect a little bit on what makes these particular set of workers so vulnerable. I'll even go so far as to use the word disenfranchised. And what needs to be done so that they don't end up without a limb, without a hand?
So thank you, Manvi. This report unsettles me each time I hear it. I mean, there have been various versions of it. It unsettles me because it speaks so closely to the reality of migrants that we know in other locations of this country. Our own work, for example, is in textile, chemical, construction, power loom, stone cutting sectors, each of which is hugely populated by migrant workers, and each of which represents a virtual war zone as far as injuries and trauma is concerned for workers. And clearly, there's a pattern, which is endemic in the nature of labor migration, and also in the nature of labor market conditions that operate, both of which you have already touched upon. The nature of migration is that it is distress driven. It is clearly pushing people to max out on their wages, on their incomes, given the fact that people are paid really poorly, which is why they are obliged to work longer hours, do more shifts, work under any conditions, even if they compromise safety. That's an option which is not, seeking something else is not an option open to them. And the labor market conditions means that there is no real regulation, no real enforcement of standards that would make it obligatory for safety to be primary, right? So in many ways, migrant workers are found in spaces that are dirty, dangerous, really risky because of not having many options, right? And this is the pattern that repeats itself in many other industries where we see abnormal number of accidents. There are of course, the estimations are quite difficult to obtain, but I believe that the manufacturing sector of India has one of the largest, accidents anywhere in the world. And the fact that migrant workers who are driven by distress, who have no ability to, no space to be unionized, to demand, to claim essential kind of, work conditions, that kind of has a bearing on the outcomes that they face on their health and physical well-being. This has to change, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. It has to change both by law and by industry practice, because workers cannot be seen to be mere kind of commodities or inputs to a process of production. In fact, workers' productivity has to be central rather than, it has to be at the center of kind of economic prosperity rather than and profits, rather than seeing workers as an item that can be cheapened by putting them to longer hours of work in dirty and dangerous conditions.
You're absolutely right. I think when we go through the report, it is very unsettling, it's troubling, and you rightly hit upon the fact that it's going to have to change at one end by law and enforcement of law, and at the other end by just raising industry practices. And we're very lucky to have Siam and ACMA with us today to really brainstorm a little bit on how we can raise the industry practices. Manufacturing sector in India, auto sector in particular, the accident rate, the injury rate, the fact that there isn't any comprehensive data available on it, that is really a bit of a challenge. And I think Safe in India is trying to address that challenge. But Professor Shyamsundar, if I can bring you into the conversation to dwell a little bit about industrial accidents, worker safety, specifically in the auto sector in India, and how does it compare with equivalently developing countries? I know that data is a problem, but I'm sure you're very good at establishing some benchmarks which will give us an idea of where India stands.
Thank you, Manvi. First of all, the statistics relating to industrial accidents, even in the manufacturing sector, which is being compiled at the national level and published by the Labour Bureau, Ministry of Labour and Employment, has been quite inadequate and unreliable, in the sense that most states do not submit returns or employers do not report accidents. the Ministry of Labor publishes industrial accidents data for manufacturing sector, factory sector, and mine sector, basically. Of course, railways and ports and docks. But engineering sector has been has accounted for lion's share of the industrial accidents, notwithstanding the unreliability in the data, mainly due to the involvement of the workers with heavy machinery. But we don't have corresponding data for certain other developing countries. I had combed the ILO stats, but what I can do instead is to give a proxy of concern of countries who are comparable, as well as those multinational corporations that whose headquarters are in some of the developed countries. So what I have done is that I have looked at the ILO conventions on occupational safety and health, and the complementary conventions like freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining, ILO conventions, and also the labor inspection convention. Together, these formulate the regulatory mindset and the institutional framework of the countries. So ILO conventions are they are adopted in the International Labour Conference. If a member country has an option either to ratify or not to ratify, but the moment a convention is ratified, it becomes binding on the member ratifying countries, and regulations, policies, and enforcement and other consultative mechanisms must be put in place. These are the requirements of any convention. Right. Which applies to occupation. So what I'm going to do without much ado is, given the paucity of time, I wish to say that India has ratified so far 47 out of 190 conventions. Since I'm an economist, it gives about 1/4 of the conventions. But if I just look at the technical conventions, many of them would have bearing on occupational safety and health, and directly or indirectly. India has ratified so far 38 of the 178 technical conventions, which gives the ratification rate of 21%. The grandmother of all OSH convention is the Occupational Safety and Health Convention 155. Okay, and this is the 155, which was adopted in 1981. Even the ILO could not adopt a convention till 1981, even after a century of industrial development. I may just add here for the debate, the developed countries have benefited by the absence of global regulation in their industrialization process, whereas the developing countries who are late industrializers are put at a disadvantage. So this is one of the polemical arguments that surround global regulations. So what I have done is that I will not read out the conventions. I have taken about 14 conventions, which, as I said, cover occupational safety and health in general, and certain other issues related to radiation, or sector-based conventions, or occupational cancer, or prevention of major industrial accidents, which India has ratified. Hours of Convention, which was the first ILO convention to be adopted in 1919, and inspection and freedom of association. So of the 14 conventions, India has ratified 5, and our neighbors have ratified less than that. So Bangladesh 3, Pakistan 4, Sri Lanka 2, Nepal 0. But if I take comparable countries like Brazil has adopted 11 out of 14 conventions. But South Africa has adopted only 1. I must also add here, Latin American countries have a higher rate of ratification in general. And Russian Federation, of course, because it was the USSR, so it has the highest ratifications, and they continued in the Russian Federation. But so Last point. Germany,
Yes,
Germany has ratified only 8, and it has not ratified the grandmother convention, occupational safety and health, and Japan has only ratified 4. So to sum it up, I would say the OSH conventions are liable to be ratified, generally have a low ratification since because of the economic cost that imposes on the countries. India is slightly, definitely better in terms of South Asian neighbors, but compared to Brazil and Russia, it is definitely have a lower ratification. But the 2009 policy, which Sachdev knows, has said that OSH ratifications impose tremendous amount of cost, especially on the smaller enterprises. So India is not at the juncture of economic development to be able to ratify these. So with that, I close.
well, thank you for that, very pertinent benchmarking exercise. This is a complex piece to navigate, and we're going to spend a little more time on it, particularly to understand what the OSH code also brings to the table in the specific Indian context with recent developments in Parliament. But, and I'm trying to crisscross territories here to understand the role that industry can play, to understand the regulatory environment, to understand the realities on the ground. But if I may say so, Anil Sachdev, ultimately it boils down to owners and manufacturers taking real and complete responsibility for worker safety, not just for humanitarian reasons, but also for sustainable growth in India. Is this, Mr. Sachdev, and I'm directing it to Anil here, a realistic expectation from auto brands, from suppliers in that auto supply chain? How can the private sector be motivated to prioritize worker safety right up there with productivity?
This depends upon how leaders define their role. If they consider the well-being of their employees as priority number one, this comes from the quality of leaders they are. Their vision in life has to serve the well-being of their people because they know it's imperative for quality, imperative for productivity, and for building a strong reputation for themselves. What does this mean? If all these owners, and I know most of them, and like I know the OEMs with whom I have worked, these people want to have a certain amount of personal reputation. So if you, for example, tell them that as soon as you enter your factory, you should put up a big hoarding or a digital board which says so many years or days without accident. And when they are proudly displaying that, I have spent 5,000 days in my factory without a single accident. And they all have annual days. We should encourage these owners when they speak to give a public speech to say, I am going to move from my current status of accidents happening at this frequency to this new shared vision that we will not allow a single accident up to this place. Video record them, play it on the website of our NGO here, so that when people give public commitments, they tend to hold themselves accountable. So these are some absolutely important ones. These owners, many times they are willing to invest in a machine when it gives them higher productivity. One has to help them to change their mindset. It's not investment in capital equipment. It is the investment in the well-being. And they should consider that intangible as important an asset as something else. So I have worked with some of them who have made this transformation. It's all in the mind, and we have to help them to widen their mind to consider this is their job one.
Well, and I'm sure that Sam, Akma, Mr. Menon, Mr. Mehta listening, because it's going to take examples, just simple examples like this. I mean, the idea of a huge board at the entrance of the factory gate which says so many days accident free. Simple, powerful, it's a commitment, it's got to be updated, and it's got to reflect the truth out there. and it could serve as an example as well as a reassurance to workers in that particular factory. We've covered some of the broad aspects of worker safety here. And I'd like to reiterate to everyone who's watching that we are focusing on the auto sector in India specifically. That's at the heart of Crush 2020. Sandeep, this is the second such report you've done. You've looked at safety issues in the auto supply chain. You're fine-tuning and expanding that process. Between the first and the second review, and this is a slightly unfair question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's the tangible progress in preventing such injuries, in providing compensation when such injuries happen? And I mean timely compensation. Tell me, how much has the needle moved and in what form and fashion has it moved?
Oh, Manvi, it's an unfair world, so an unfair question is welcome. Between the first and the second report, if I look inside and outside, right, clearly we and our team, what we are trying to do constantly is improve our understanding of the issue so we can come with better solutions. In that, we have made significant progress. We have helped another 500 workers last year. They have given us more information. We understand power press and its issues better. We understand why these accidents are happening better, where these accidents are happening better. That's the inside picture. And all this help of workers, which obviously gratifies us, that has moved a lot and we are very proud of that. When we go outside, what we have been able to do outside with this knowledge, a few things stand as progress, others don't, right? So where we have progressed is increasing public awareness. Today's webinar and this presence of a very esteemed panel is, I think, an evidence of that progress, that very important people are engaging with this issue and we can move the needle with them, right? We have made progress with at least Maruti Suzuki in taking some actions, and we're hearing anecdotal comments in the industry about their increasing awareness of their supply chain, them talking about guards on power presses, them wanting to go national with some of these initiatives. Time will tell if these happen to the extent that we think they should happen now. But I think they have made a very good start. With the government, there is a committee under DG Fastly. I know their office is today on this call and they are listening, and thanks to them. But we really got to move that because we don't know what exactly is happening underneath that, right? Haryana government has set up a committee, as I was saying earlier. Fantastic, because this is a big Haryana issue. You know, when we compare one state with another, we often find good practices elsewhere. I mean, it is often said that factories in South India run better than North India. And I have lived in both parts of the country, right? So maybe we can get good practice from there and Haryana can gain from it. And that understanding itself can be useful, right? But we haven't made progress in a few areas. We haven't really reduced accidents as of now. And that's because the report got published in August. People started working from August 19. 2021 is a year when we should see reduction. But of course, COVID will change that data. So we'll see how that works out, right? Hero Honda haven't moved as fast as we wanted them to move. And we can talk the same thing about central and state. We, of course, want everybody to move faster. But I think Professor Shyam Sundar was saying something about comparisons of India with the other countries. I do want to stress this point in reaction to that and in terms of progress. There is this thing about what they have adopted as a country, any country, and there is a separate thing about what actually happens and does it really mean anything, right? When we compare social indicators of Bangladesh, which has accepted fewer, but their social indicators are better than us even today. They have done better in health, in mortality rates for children. Why don't we? Education, why don't we? Unless we take care of all these things, and safety is part of that, how are we going to become better as a productive nation, right? More productive nation. How can we ignore worker productivity? There we have not made a difference, and I'm hoping today is another start for that.
Okay, as long as, we continue to press forward on this issue of worker safety, and I really think this is an opportune moment to hear once again from a worker exactly how their life gets affected. And what they are telling us all today after their losses, their injuries. This is Shyam Dev Pandit. Let's listen from him.
जाता रो तो पिया जी के घर हो। गाना गाना पसंद था सर, लेकिन अब जब से चोट लगी है सर, मैं सब कुछ भूल गया। होती है। पहले मैं नाहरपुर दारू ठेके के पास रह रहा था, तो वहाँ पे भी 2-3 लेडीज़ रह रही थी, तो देख देख के हंस रहे थे। तीनों बंदे हाथ काट के बैठ गए, तीनों बंदे हाथ काट के बैठ गए, इसलिए ऊपर लिया एक साइड में। ये 4थी फ्लोर है। पावर प्रेस मशीन चला रहा था, उसमें मोटरसाइकिल का पार्ट बन रहे थे, हीरो होंडा का पार्ट। वो माल निकालते समय डबल स्टेप की वजह से मेरी उंगली कट गई। हम और मेरे भांजे दोनों के एक ही फैक्ट्री में एक्सीडेंट हो गया। नहाने धोने में, कपड़े धोने में कठिनाई होती है। एक बाल्टी पानी नहीं ले जा सकते हैं सर, इसे एक मग पानी भी नहीं उठती है। रोटी बेल नहीं सकता हूँ। मेरे सहारा तो ये जो मेरे साथ में बंदे, ये तो इसके सहारा चल रहा हूँ सर, नहीं तो मैं तो भूखे मर जाता यहाँ पे। सर मैं जम्मू ज़िला बिहार से मानेसर में आया था फैक्ट्रियों में काम करने के लिए। हम लोग लेबर चौक पे चले जाते थे गोल चक्कर के पास, वहाँ से एक ठेकेदार उठा के ले गया। तीनों बंदे काम किए 2-2 महीना, लॉकडाउन के पहले भी और लॉकडाउन के बाद भी। 1 रुपया नहीं मिला सर। हम लोग भूख से तरस रहे थे सर। मेरे बच्चे जन्म लिए सर 12 अप्रैल को, तो मैंने सोचा कि मैं गांव जाता हूं, सारा बच्चे देख लूँगा। गांव में लगभग 1100 किलोमीटर दूर है। चल बोले भूख से यहाँ भी मरनी है, भूख से मरते मरते तो गांव पहुँच जाऊँगा। 5 किलो लगभग चूड़ा थे, सूखे हुए सामान, और कुछ नहीं थे मेरे पास में। तो मैंने पुलिस के डंडे का मार खा के आपस घूम गया। कमाने खाने के लिए तो कुछ तो करना पड़ेगा सर। तो मैं गाँव में सिंगार की दुकान दे सकता हूँ सर, उससे मेरी रोजी रोटी चल सकती है। क्योंकि सर मेरे पीछे 6-6 बंदे हैं सर, उसको भी तो देखना है। यही कहना चाहता हूँ कि हिम्मत हारिए नहीं, हिम्मत बांध के रखिए। अगर हिम्मत है तो सब कुछ है।
I think that's a lesson for all of us. I have to say, Shyamdev Pandit, he maintains a pretty upbeat outlook on life. Of course, at the outset, he said, I don't really feel like singing very much anymore, but quite a lesson there for all of us at a personal level as well. We have a number of questions that are coming in from the audience as well, and they're coming through on the chat handle of this webinar. The team at Safe in India has been collecting those questions, and I'm going to pose them to the panel. I should warn you, perhaps Mr. Menon and Mr. Mehta, some of those could be coming your way specifically, so brace yourself for that. So this question is from Amita Joseph, who's director of the Business and Community Foundation, which has been working with businesses for 23 years now. She shares that, when she was recently buying a car, she was guided by Safe in India's work in data and actually stayed away, refused to buy from 3 companies that have had a major accident record in their supply chain. Her question is this: we can applaud ethical consumerism, but how do we get the government to be more proactive? Before I direct that question to the panel, I just want to apologize in advance to those in the audience who are asking questions. If I'm paraphrasing some of them, please bear with me. There's no agenda here, just for the sake of brevity, I might paraphrase some of your questions. So, ethical consumerism, how do we get the government to be more proactive? I would say, how do we create a culture among the big brands as well to recognize that this could be the way that consumers act going forward? And it could be time to just start taking this issue very seriously, because, it's playing out in the West across product categories. And it's only a matter of time before ethical consumerism becomes a force in itself in India as well. So I'm going to first come to you, Mr. Menon, for that, and then to Mr. Mehta as well, and other panelists to weigh in as well. Mr. Menon, do you think that ethical consumerism is a force that OEMs and brands should start paying attention to before it becomes a force?
Thank you, Manvi, for this question. Yes, of course, it's an important attribute which must be recognized by the OEMs. But I'm saying that is one important aspect, certainly. But I think OEMs and our member organizations in the auto sector would want to do it for economic sense also. I think it makes sheer and pure economic sense to focus on health and safety from an angle of productivity. So from all aspects, and I think there was a question on government regulations. Yes, government has a role to play, but I think industry has to do it proactively, There have been many cases and many instances where industry has come out with a voluntary code and have worked very closely with members to follow that code in terms of enforcement in some form. So there is a role which industry can play, and I think that is what we are committed as SIAM to work with Safe India Foundation and see how we can structure that mechanism and which industry can play a much more proactive role.
Really, this idea of ethical consumerism potentially becoming a force in itself, potentially government also, in a sense, highlighting it, and the impact that that could have on everyone that's in the supply chain. Reflect on that.
So, Manvi, this is something great if it can be sort of pick up, The problem in our society is that we are not a very aware society. Whichever society you look at, you may go and sign as many conventions as you want, but if the society is not an awakened, is not an aware society, you will never progress. Okay, now this thought of ethical consumerism is absolutely brilliant, but the consumer should bear in mind that eventually they'll have to bear the cost. Okay, because there is a cost to compliance. Okay, when we are talking about invoking anything, there's a cost to it, and Mr. Menon referred to the economics of it. Okay, the whole point is if we as a society are willing to walk that talk, we can definitely make a change. But are we willing? Are we ready? I also sometimes, moving a little bit out of the context, you see, we are running through a pandemic. Okay, everybody knows it's a health hazard. How many of people you see on the road wearing a mask properly? I go to my office every once a week and I find on the road people with masks on their chins, 90% of the people, maybe if not 90, 80% at least. So the point is, are we an aware society? Do we really mean to literally evolve? It's for us to look inwards and then comment on. Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, that's how.
No, point taken, point taken. Society has a role to play. And after all, we are talking about ethical consumerism here.
And by the way, I'm not defending the accidents that happen. It's a shame. Yeah.
Right. Anil, I mean, a little bit on the idea of ethical consumerism, but I think we've reflected on that a fair bit. There's one piece, and this is coming through in the comments, the section questions as well from the audience. The accidents may not technically be happening at the OEMs. It's happening in their supply chain. There is this structure which allows, therefore, the OEMs and their boards to derive comfort from the fact that it's not in their factories, direct factories. How do we expand their sense of responsibility to include all those factories that supply to them?
You see, just like in the area of sustainability, you are supposed to look at the carbon footprint, water usage in the entire supply chain. It is imperative for all OEMs to ask, because they look at an audit of all processes as a part of the, process improvement activity. Safety should be on job one. I know of big global companies like in oil and gas and in energy, where there is a representative on the board responsible only for safety. It's high time that auto companies in the boards of the companies, in their audit committees, were to put safety as job one. And two, in asking suppliers to report on process reliability, they are not just looking at applying 6 sigma to 3.4 defects per million, but safety as an important feature, so there is no deviation from that. And I spent a lot of time in Japan. Here is a very interesting story. When the Japanese were trying to get their people educated about using some of the equipment better, which were causing accidents, they named the equipment after a person who was much loved in the community. And because they were naming the equipment after that particular hero in the community that everybody liked, the care for that equipment, it's like Tata Motors in the earlier days named the biggest press tool after it was called JET, after Mr. Talaulikar, the board member of Tata Motors. When press shop, the preventive maintenance and usage and accidents improved dramatically. Because if this is the place where we are worshipping this man, how can we allow that man's name to be tarnished by not maintaining the standards of the right kind? So here was another very practical tool that I have seen happening, and I have several other ideas, but I'm sure I can come to that if you want me to elaborate further.
And it's always interesting to hear some of these practical ideas, and we can carry that message forward. This is a very simple question, Professor Shamsundar, and I mean, you know, it's one I want to ask. Why no data from 2017? This is coming from a member in the audience.
There are. I mean, the industrial accidents collection data is a statutory process, but it so happens that the state, I mean, we have to understand the process. The factories may not report all the industrial incidents, industrial accidents that happen to the state labor department unless it is fatal. And state labor departments, beleaguered they are as they are with multiple functions, fail often to send the returns to the labor bureau, and as a result, the industrial accidents data suffer a lot. Alternatively, there is I suggest Safe India to look at the Directorate of Criminal Bureau, because whenever fatal accidents take place, an FIR will have to be lodged with the police station. So, in fact, I have collected some data from the Directorate of Criminal Bureau to analyze the contemporary industrial accidents data. As I've argued in a piece in The Wire, there is no accountability on anyone in terms of production of statistics, because the whole, in the name of liberalization, simplification of returns and all kinds of bureaucracy, of course, which is a fair demand from the industry, the big picture has been lost out. The use of statistics for policy making is not there as a structural feature in lawmaking. None of the legislations, in fact, quote any statistics to justify the liberalizations that they do or changes that they do. So, labor statistics in India is an ancient commodity. It has been tossed out of the window, and Labor Bureau is just there without any function. It can be called as a non-employment bureau.
Well, that's a real.
And DG Fastly does not publish, and I got combed. In fact, DG Fastly, there is a annual meeting of the Chief Inspectorate of Factories from various state governments, and the proceedings would all be collected and collated and published internally. All these documents should be made public. DG Fastly should, in fact, undertake a survey, and I combed that website. It is pitiably, absolutely, statistical deficits are there. So the point about consumer, what is it? Ethical consumerism. Ethical consumerism will kick alive only when there is a statistical database that exists and it reaches them. So if there is no statistical database, ethical consumerism won't act. On the contrary, ethical producerism must take place, and I have done a study on the supply chain of automobile industry in Pune. The cost of the cost of lives and labor cost is shifted vertically downwards. The OEM is the biggest maximizer of profits. There is no HR audit done by the OEMs or tier 1 or tier 2 from the ancillaries. So it is ethical producerism is required. Consumerism will come later.
Fair point, Professor Shamsundar. Ethical producerism, and we're going to talk about this at great length when we finish off the Q&A session with members from the audience. We've got a bunch of questions coming in, and I'm very quickly going to direct one at you, Sandeep, because this is an area that Safe in India has been working on. You've been pushing, the ESI system as well, the compensation to workers who have been injured. What progress have you seen on that front? And I'm going to join Rajiv Khandelwal as well with his insights on post-injury compensation and redressal mechanism.
So, apart from helping more and more workers that we can in getting the compensation that they deserve, and I mentioned the number of 18 crore rupees worth of compensation we have been able to manage to get to them. The systemic change based on that within ESIC is our big thrust area, and I'll talk a little bit about that. What we have done with ESIC over the past 2 years, and the previous Director General actually was very cooperative. We were able to work a few things with him. Couple of examples. Safe in India launched for its workers something called a health diary, which was about keeping their records for health with ESIC and their communication with ESIC as a record to use in courts or escalation of complaints when needed, because they're not keeping it. Workers don't understand that, so we educated them on that. That health diary was picked up by ESIC, and they created their own health diary based on that, which started going national, but then because of COVID, it stopped. But that is in the offing, it will go national. If they go with their implementation of this idea, 14 crore people in the country will get that diary. And that's really important because workers can keep their health records in one place. Of course, the digital strategy Prime Minister has will have a role to play in that, but there is that big one. The second big one I can talk about is the awareness of ESIC services is really low. Would you believe it that in the whole country every year only 40,000 women take the cash benefit for maternity that ESIC promises, and we have 14 crore people dependent. So how is that even possible? People are not aware. The penetration of ESIC services is low, and unfortunately, and we have raised it on several fora with ESIC, they don't make enough effort to make workers aware because they're a monopoly, right? So people don't have to come to know unless they really push it. So we are trying to increase awareness, and they again introduced something called a welcome pack, online and offline, which was supposed to go to 14 crore people. COVID stopped it. We are going to start pushing it again, right? In addition, we have been making a variety of recommendations around unemployment schemes for COVID. They have launched one recently. Now we are pushing to improve that because operationally it is not working. On paper it works, but otherwise not. There are 6 schemes announced by Finance Minister in April and May. The detail of that is still not there. We are pushing for detail of that so that they can actually be used, because right now they are not used by anybody. And we are talking 6 schemes announced. So there is some work started, a lot more to be done. Apart from what we do in Gurgaon, the idea is to take those lessons nationally to help 14 crore people.
Okay, Rajiv Khandelwal, I'm going to actually summarize a bunch of things that have come through in the comments section, and bear with me because I'm seeking, well, like all broadcast journalists in India, snappy, quick fixes. One is, how far can training go in actually preventing accidents and injury? And I'm not trying to shift responsibility from producers to workers, because actually producers also have to be vested in that training process. So one is the role of training. The second is any insights on gender and the burden of injuries according to gender. We've heard from Neetu Devi, but it has been dominantly men who are speaking through. The third is this idea that many are not aware of ESIC and the compensation that is due to them. Perhaps the paperwork that is required to claim that compensation is onerous as well. You are working with migrant workers day in and day out. On these 3 fronts, can you share some experiences and learnings and solutions?
So, let me say that I think we need a very urgently a mechanism, a whole structure of response to workers' accidents and injuries across all labor markets in this country. Given the fact that injuries are happening to workers who are informally employed, casually employed, they do not have documentation to prove their employment relationship with their contractors or with the principal employers, who cannot produce evidence to prove who were they really working for. And I think in most of our own legal aid work, that is the single biggest stumbling block, that we have difficulty improving employment relations in the kind of markets that we are talking about. Okay. And I think there's a strong case that a new sensitively crafted legal aid system is put in place, which takes into account the fact that workers are without evidence. They will not have documentation. They will not be able to prove how they came, who were they employed for. They will not have Hajri diaries, so on and so forth. Within that schema, surely women workers are probably the most severely affected. Okay, they are often, they are, of course, they will not have documentation like the others, but they would disproportionately share larger burdens of work and lower wages across all these scenarios. We did a study recently, last year, estimating what kinds of what we called as unskilled work by women, what does it actually comprise? And we found that every woman construction worker on construction sites in Ahmedabad carries 3,000 to 4,000 kgs of weight of bricks on her head, up and down, very, very complex kind of construction maze sites. How can that work be even unskilled? you know and these are the workers, these are the women workers who have no healthcare, who have no maternity benefits, whose children are also playing on the same sites and so on, and they are also, by the way, reproducing household functions in cities as they migrate. So they are not only working, they're also performing household duties, so enormous long hours of work and so on. I think those kinds of sensibilities about how gendered burdens in work are getting shared, are pushed to on women, are yet to, they're a far cry. They're very far from our kind of mindsets, especially in the kind of markets we are talking about. I know that today we are here together a day after the OSH code, along with other codes, got pushed through the parliament, through the Rajya Sabha yesterday without any debate or argument. It does not even lay down a basic protocol, a basic framework of safety and occupational health, which is acceptable, which should be inviolable right of all workers in this country. Not having that is a signal, is a big signal to those who want to play truant on those standards. If there was a chance to at least do that, there are many other deficiencies in the code, but the OSH code does not even specify what an acceptable safety and health standard is. We are heading in a very, very wrong, race to the bottom. And I think we maybe have a chance. What we see, most accidents occurring, Manvi, are in very downstream industries, okay, where marginal employers are employing migrant workers. Their own margins are very small. They do not have the surplus or the capacity to create safety conditions that will reduce accidents. How does profit get shared from upstream to downstream? Who will invest in these small entrepreneurs, small players, so that work conditions for workers who are employed there at that level of firm, their work conditions improve? It cannot be expected of marginal employers, of survivalist enterprises, to put in those kinds of investments. They have to be borne in at other points in the value chain, which must be taken as an inviolable kind of practice, rather than be just pushed onto supply chain से ही नहीं है, इनसे हम नहीं खरीदेंगे. Look at how margins are getting shared.
Mr. Menon, I'm going to bring it straight to you. The fact that OEMs have a moral and business responsibility to really lead the way on this front. You're in all likelihood going to initiate these conversations with them to make the idea of worker safety, prevention of injuries, actually be a reality beyond law, beyond what is the minimum required. And in light of that, and we've heard a number of somber points raised today, in light of that, what are you proposing in terms of next steps with members of SIAM, with OEMs, to take this issue and agenda forward?
From a SIAM perspective, I think what's in our mind on the immediate horizon is to work with our OEMs to make sure that we engage many more OEMs beyond what was mentioned in the presentation at the beginning of the webinar. So we have a wider outreach of engagement with OEMs across segments of the industry. That's one. Second is we of course would, each OEM has a what they call OSHA setups, which focus on occupational safety and health administration setups in each OEM. So we will work with OSHA setups in each of the OEMs, and more importantly, work with the materials department. I think materials department has a role to play because they will be the ones who will be engaging with the supply chain, which is where where large action lies. And therein, I think there's a role to play because materials department can help in creating SOPs on worker safety, can look at training, hand-holding, and probably look at and prioritize worker safety as important attribute as quality. I think there is a clear role in terms of both OSHA setups as well as materials department with OEMs, and that's what we plan to do when we increase our bandwidth of engagement with OEMs across segments.
And to get that message to suppliers down the line, Mr. Menon, are you seeing that also as a part of the agenda going forward?
Absolutely. I think when I said materials department, we will work with materials department of each companies as a partner who will facilitate us to reach out to wider supply chain. And of course, we'll work closely with ACMA because we have a very close engagement. So we will of course partner with ACMA. But as Vinny mentioned, there's a larger bandwidth of value chain which we need to cover, and that's what we will try and do with OEMs.
Right. Vinny, the same question sort of coming your way, and I'm going to request you beforehand to unmute your mic. The challenge is to go deep and wide. And I've repeated myself a number of times on that front. Something like a safety audit, which actually encompasses all aspects of safety. I'm going to set aside the lacuna in the OSH code. I'm going to set aside, legislation and regulation implementation issues and ask as producers.
Right. So
a safety audit.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no denying that. Manvi, the right way to go about is when an OEM does a procurement, and that's what Rajesh was referring to, their supply or sourcing teams. They do various kinds of audits of the suppliers. Okay. One can also include a safety audit. Okay. And say, hey, if there are so many accident days or you can just define something. Okay, you define on quality, right? You can define something on accidents also and say, look, we're not going to buy from you if you exceed a certain number of accidents or you've not been sort of taking care of your people in a certain defined manner. And mind you, some of the OEMs say Maruti has a very fantastic institution called MACE, which has a very state-of-the-art lab on safety. Okay, so it's not that the industry is not doing things. ACMA runs cluster programs. We have run interventions in 1,200 plus companies, and we've benchmarked some of them with the zero accident days. We've instituted awards on safety. Actually, the awards on safety we instituted post the first report. Okay, we have counselors who go and upgrade factory shop floors, and all my counselors today have undergone a very rigorous training with DuPont, which is something like a benchmark globally in terms of their safety practices. So again, audits definitely, if we can bring them in. And there are, again, Manvi, it's somewhere a glass half full, and we really need to cover that ground that's not full till such time these kind of challenges will keep on happening. And therein role comes in for Sandeep, who keeps on literally showing us the scorecard. And I think we need to work together so that that half full becomes completely full, and that's the way it should be.
Professor Shamsundar, I'd like you to join in, and
I want to say particularly on this aspect, supply chain. Can I say, because I have done some field work on that?
Yes.
There are four critical, in my opinion, observations. When I did my field study with respect to the OEMs, and I asked the IR managers, will you please give me some sample of vendors that is down the supply chain. They said that IR department and vendors department do not have interface. Vendors department lists are confidential documents. Now, secondly, I asked, is there a HR audit clause in your commercial contracts? Yes, they do exist in tier 1 and tier 2, but I had managed to track with the help of the trade unions to go down to the home-based worker who was having the small lathe. And I say home-based worker, self-employed worker with one person. I mean, I do not know how many tiers or peels of onion I must have ripped off, but I'm asking 3 questions to the people who are representing the employers and others. Number 1, can the supply chain HR issues be shared with the trade union at the OEM to be able to have some transparency in HR down the line? Is there an interface between IR, HR, whatever one calls fashionable names? Is there an interface between these 2 departments, and can the trade union and the company, can they be transparent? That is point number 1. Point number 2, will the OEM collect statistical data on industrial accidents taking place down the supply chain? In other words, will they be able to map out their supply chain and be able to conduct HR audits and take responsibility, not in term, I'm not taking in terms of cost and other responsibility, but to be able to tell, yes, this is our supply chain and this is the mapping and these are the accidents that have taken place. Finally, so long the commercial contracts are on auction basis, the lower tenders will always be awarded the commercial contracts for production. So as a result, there is a tendency to outbid another and have the cost reduced. And I have seen, I have been told by many firms who are foundries who employ less than 20 workers, which the OSH code unfortunately do not cover, they have been displaced by their competitors. So this auctioning, commercial auctioning process is a constraint in ensuring OSH. All the kind of things that they talk about by the OEMs will be stopped at tier 2. That is my observation. Thanks.
Okay. This is a question, Mr. Menon, sort of directed your way. I know we've acknowledged that this is the start of a consultation process and it may be premature to deliver answers. Vinny, same goes for you as well. But I was wondering if Vinny, Mr. Menon, would you like to respond to Professor Shyamsundar?
Okay, I may not have the whole answer of it, but yes, definitely supply chains are very well mapped. I will come back to you whether the IRs and the vendors departments talk to each other or not. I will come back to you. I'm frankly not aware of this. HR audits have started happening again, I'm not very sure if they map the accidents, okay, but it'd be worth its while if they're not being done to include those because, you know, it brings to perspective of what we are talking today. So at least this is my response to you in the limited understanding that I have, but I will come back to you on the rest of the questions that you have raised.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Menon?
No, as I said, we have just started our engagement with OEM. So from that perspective, this is one important attribute to check out with each of them. So this is a important feedback for us. So we will see how we pass it on and try and do value add on these sort of perspectives.
Right. So, I mean, you know, important pointers there from Professor Shyamsundar, whether it's on the interface between IR, HR and procurement teams, whether OEMs can collect data on industrial accidents down the value chain, can HR audits happen? All of these being put on the table to be part of the consultations going forward. I'm mindful of the fact that we're short on time. So I'm just going to bring in Anil Sachdev here and ask you from statements to proclamations to, you know, to really deliver a real change in the attitudes of leadership teams, current and future, because you're grooming the future generation in your business school. What's the message that you're putting out there?
A message that leaders must have a skin in the game. I want to quote Mukundan, MD of Tata Chemicals, who adopted a practice from Tata Steel. If there is an accident, for lifetime of that person, should that person have been alive, the family, the senior management of the company contributes out of their salary a fund to look after them. 1/3 of that budget is given by the top management, 1/3 by the contractor who employed that person, and 1/3 by the company. So I have a skin in the game. This is not like giving a speech that safety is job one. If there is a problem, I am going to directly hold myself accountable. And secondly, do not allow a single untrained person, even if that person is a casual worker, to enter the shop floor without minimum safety training. Certified people and trained people are only allowed to enter the factory. Just like we check temperature for COVID, we check minimum understanding of safety and practices before you are allowed to work inside. And these are two very practical things that I think we should introduce.
Rajiv Khandelwal, same question to you. Final thought, I'm going to request it to be brief. Something that you want to reiterate and put on the table today.
I believe that we found
Rajiv, I'm sorry. I have to apologize and cut you off because the audio is not coming through clearly. I was asking for your final thoughts, but we're not able to get your audio. In fact, we can't make out what you were saying. So I'm going to give it another shot. Rajiv, you were saying.
I have, can I come in just briefly? Can I come in briefly?
Rajiv has to unmute himself. Rajiv has to unmute. Yeah.
Professor?
Yeah. I would echo Anil Sachdev on the Tata Steel, Tata this thing. I have studied collective agreements about 220. Very few companies have OSH as a negotiable collective bargaining subject. Tata Steel has a separate agreement on OSH. And even as a visitor, I would have to be trained prior to my visit for 3 to 4 hours. Of course, iron and steel industry has a high hazardous firm, but Tata Steel, I must put on record, notwithstanding the accidents that have been reported, they are incidental to the occupation, but they have high emphasis on OSH, and collective agreements take place and training takes place, and even the visitors are not allowed as a casual visitor. So,
right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so the exemplar effect that could inspire others too. Rajiv Khandelwal, you were saying final thoughts. I'm going to request for brevity. I apologize, but I think I had to cut you off because of poor audio.
No, that's fine. If you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, my limited point was that the cost of improvements is actually quite small. In several industries, it takes a small amount of money to reduce accidents and to reduce injuries and deaths. That cannot be holding us back. You know, that small amount of money cannot be holding us back. We should not be thinking about making workers safe. It should be about making the work environment safe. And I think that's how we should move forward.
Okay. Vinny Mehta, final thoughts from you.
No, we are committed to it. And ACMA, SIAM have to work together to change the landscape. There's no option.
Rajesh Menon, final thoughts?
No, as Vinny said, as SIAM, as Indian OEMs, we are committed to the entire this entire journey. We will work closely to get a wider participation of OEMs and take more accountability and be a part of this journey.
Sandeep, we've got the most recent findings on worker injuries in Crush 2020, but it's safe in India. What will you be prioritizing? Because COVID included, the landscape is a challenging one to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, we'll continue helping workers, continue providing evidence to the industry of how things are changing. I hope they change for the better, in which case we'll present that evidence. We'll continue sharing our understanding of why these accidents are happening and what could be the solutions. I want to also stress the point which has come up a couple of times today. We really think that the first 30-40% of the accidents that we are highlighting can be reduced by improved awareness, pressure from OEMs and supply chain big leaders. Because right now people are not looking at this problem at all. If they just started looking at this problem, which hasn't been looked at, first 1/3 are easy, in my opinion. So we should really, before we get too much into cost versus benefit, which can have a mixed opinion, I really think first 30-40% is not a cost issue at all. It's about awareness and pushing. The last 30% may be either thugs or too expensive. We'll come to that. And then there are these habitual offenders. Let's take care of habitual offenders. And I'm really thankful to the panel to come together. And if we can work together, my God, we can find a solution to this pretty quickly.
I'm regretting the fact that I didn't ask a pointed question. And Sandeep, I'm just going to ask you for 30 seconds to reflect on power presses, because power presses alone, if they are made safer, we should see a fairly significant reduction in accidents and worker injuries.
Spot on. 52% and now 59% of these accidents have happened on power presses. Industry understands power presses. Every specialist we speak to understands power presses. They also tell us that if you can focus on power presses, here are 5 things that you can do. And we will publish a report on that pretty soon. We shall have both legal, technical, people-oriented solutions to finding an answer to power press problems. So yes, if again, we can first prioritize power press accidents and audit power presses, make sure the sensors are working, which I know is an economic challenge too, we can reduce those accidents very quickly.
On that note, brings us to the end of today's conversation. Vinny Mehta, Rajesh Menon, Anil Sachdev, Rajiv Khandelwal, Professor Shyam Sundar, many, many thanks for your time today, for your insights, and more importantly, for your continuing engagement and support on this issue. Thank you from Safe in India and from me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we bid goodbye to our panel, but the Safe in India team is going to be online till 4:15 to take many more questions on the report. They've actually been very busy tracking all of the comments that are coming through. We would have liked to potentially pose all these questions to the panelists, but there are constraints on their time. If you can continue to share your questions in the comments box, those questions will be answered between now and 4:15. So time permitting, we should be able to cover a substantial chunk of them. Always helps to know a little bit of background on the person who's asking the question so that the answer can be contextualized as well. But while you do that, we continue to bring you the voices of those who are affected, workers. And here they are talking about how they feel about factory safety audits that are conducted.
ऑडिट वाले आएंगे, अपने ऑफिस में आके खाना खाया पिया और अपने चले गए। शाम को उनकी दावत होगी पार्टी के, ये कंपनी वाला पार्टी देगा उनको, शाम को खा पी के चले जाएंगे। उनको शॉप से कोई मतलब नहीं है क्या हो रहा है क्या नहीं हो रहा है।
ऐसा कितने लोग मानते हैं?
जैसे आज ऑडिट है, उनको रोक दिया जाता है। रोक इसलिए दिया जाता है कि अगर वो देखेंगे कि हमारा अंगूठा कटा है तो वो लोग माल नहीं लेंगे। अगर सीनियर उनके आते हैं तो, बाकी जहाँ तक मेरा अंदाज़ है सीनियर तो उनके नहीं है। जैसे बोले कुछ लोग बोले जापानी आते हैं, जापानी ने किसी को देखा है? कोई नहीं देखा है, सारे बीच कंपनी वाले आते हैं। ये इसलिए होता है, वो आते हैं खाते हैं पीते हैं इसलिए चले जाते हैं कि उनको पैसे मिल जाते हैं। इसलिए हमने आपको पहले भी अगले मीटिंग में आपको बताया था इस बात को, वो आते हैं पैसे लेते हैं चले जाते हैं। ना उनसे ये चेक करने से मोबाइल हमारी सही है कि गलत है, उनको बस आए खाए पिए चले गए। माल सही बन रहा है कि सही नहीं बन रहा है, उनको सही माल से मतलब है, चाहे आपका हाथ कटे या खुद कट जाओ।
तो वो लोग आते हैं तो वो तो हटा देते हैं, अपने लोग बैठ जाते हैं। भरकर पूरी किसी को जानकारी ही नहीं है। आज दिन तक की मेरी सन 2012 में उंगली कटी थी, मुझे 1 महीना हुआ था करते करते। मैं तो गया था चलाने के लिए, जब किसी वर्कर को भर्ती करने से पहले उसे बताया ही नहीं जाता है जिस कंपनी में कि मतलब कैसे काम करना है, किस तरीके से क्या क्या करना है। अब वहाँ तो ऐसा हो रहा है, चल ये आ गया, चल भाई ये काम ऐसे करना है, ये दबानी है, ये मारना है, ये हटाना है, ये चल रहा है कंपनियों के अंदर। अब यहाँ बोल रहे ऑडिट वाले हीरो वाले आते हैं, मारुति वाले, यहाँ तो कुल वर्कर ऐसे बैठे हुए हैं जिन्हें यही नहीं पता ये हीरो कंपनी से आए या मारुति वाले से आए कि आज ऑडिट है या नहीं है। बस अगर आए हैं थोड़ी देर के लिए, हेलमेट दे दिया, वो लगा लो, ग्लव्स पहन लो, ये लगा के चलाने लगो, थोड़ी देर के लिए वो चले गए, बस फिर मर्जी चाहो पैसा करो, धक्के मार के काम करवाओ। ये होता है कंपनियों में, जो मेरे हिसाब से हो रहा मेरे कंपनी के अंदर।
I just wanted to repeat what Sandeep had said a short while ago, that Crushed 2020, the report has been officially released online. It is available for you to go through in great detail. A summary of the same, of course, was brought to you by Sandeep, the highlights of Crushed 2020. And it was a somber set of findings, if I may say that, Sandeep, because of a bit of a slide on worker safety over the previous report, which was Crushed 2019. Over to you for any details and announcements regarding the report.
Thank you, Manvi, and thank you for keeping us going for the last 1.5 hours. And thanks to, I think most of the time we had more than 100 participants, at some time almost 150. So thanks to all of them too. As you said, the report is launched. It's in public domain now. The media would start covering it from tomorrow. We are available to people to answer any questions, take any challenges, take any suggestions. It's really important that people on today give us their best ideas and challenge us. And we are very happy to improve our work as we go along. We have just started on this journey about 4 years back. It's a long way to go. Whether it's ESIC systemic change or it is industry, it's a long way to go. Every year we'll learn new things, come up with this data, come up with ideas, and hopefully work with you and everybody else to keep this agenda going.
Well, on that note, I'm going to take my leave, but the team of Safe in India, many congratulations on the report. And I say congratulations not because there is good news contained in the report, but because it's important to keep the focus on worker safety, to put solid data out there to plug that gap when it comes to the condition of workers in the Indian auto sector supply chain. So thank you and goodbye. And as I mentioned, the Safe in India team continuing to take your questions, answering on the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody has asked a question, what is a power press? We can show the video again, but very quickly, power press is a machine where a metal part normally is placed in the middle of a very powerful press, which comes down like this, sometimes 500 times an hour. And in manual machines, a worker takes a piece of metal, puts it under the press, which comes down, it's called the die, and takes it out after it's formed and throws it into, let's say, a bucket, and does this constantly, sometimes 500 times an hour. So you can imagine that if you keep doing this, sooner or later, your fingers are going to be inside the power press. But of course, it's an age-old problem. So there are safety sensors which can be put on the machine. In case the hand is still inside the press, when it's coming down, the press stops. So the accident can easily be stopped. But of course, under production pressure, because of poor safety norms, because people want to save a few pennies, these sensors, when they stop working, they're not put in place, or they are actually stopped to make work because the machine can run faster. And the responsibility of safety moves from technology to the human being. And therefore, these accidents happen. So that's what power press does all the time. We have videos on our website. You can see them anytime on our YouTube channel. So I'm going to also go off the video now. Once again, thank you very much also for hanging on for the 15 minutes. Please do stay in touch. help us push the agenda of workers further. It's not an easy one, but together we can really make it happen. There is a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can start with. So thank you and hope to see you again. We hope to do a Hindi webinar in near future, and you'll once again get invites for that. So thanks.
ये मेरी नानी है और ये मेरे नाना है। इन्होंने मेरा नाम रखा है चुलबुल पांडे और स्वस्तिका पांडे।
चुलबुल चुलबुल ज़्यादा मतलब करती थी, प्यार से चुलबुल नाम रख दी।
थोड़ा बहुत शर्माती हूँ। 2 अक्टूबर को मेरा बर्थडे और गांधी जी का बर्थडे होता है। मम्मी टूटी जाती है।
मन में तो इच्छा यही है कि मतलब मैं अच्छा से अच्छा पढ़ाई कराऊँ। तो मेरी सहेली का घर वाला एक है इलाहाबाद में, बोला है कि वहाँ हॉस्टल है एक, बोला कि मैं नाम लिखा दूँगा। शादी मेरी 2003 में हुई थी यूपी में गाजीपुर। वहाँ बहुत हमें लोग सता रहा था, मेरी सास और इसके पापा। मुझे दहेज नहीं मिला, मुझे हार नहीं मिला, ये नहीं मिला, वो नहीं मिला। ये दोनों बच्चे लोग छोटा थे। 2015 में अपने मायके से हरियाणा मानेसर में आई हूँ। आकर के मैं ड्यूटी पकड़ ली। 2015 से लेकर के 2020 तक 2 बार हाथ कटा है, 1 बार पैर कटा है। मतलब उसी कंपनी हीरो और मारुति होंडा सबका पार्ट बनता है।
मम्मी को एक रोटी बनाने में मुश्किल पड़ती है और एक खाना खाने में मुश्किल पड़ती है। अपनी मम्मी से सबसे ज़्यादा प्यार करती हूँ, अपनी गुड़िया से सबसे ज़्यादा प्यार करती हूँ।
मेरा एक्सीडेंट होने के बाद भी 3 बार एक्सीडेंट हो चुका, लेकिन फिर भी मैं अपने बच्चे को चाहती हूँ कि कम से कम मेरा बच्चा मतलब सही रास्ता पकड़ ले, बढ़िया पोस्ट पर नौकरी पकड़ ले।
मेरे को बड़े होकर CID इंस्पेक्टर बनना है। अपना घर बनाऊंगी और मम्मी को अपने साथ रखूंगी।